Her millionaire fiancé slept with her mother before their wedding. She turned the ceremony into payback. Many of you might think this sounds like a negative story. You may even feel like leaving. But stay with me, my beautiful family. I promise you this is not a negative story. It's a powerful one, filled with a beautiful twist you never saw coming. Hi, my very beautiful, loyal, and best family in the world. How are you? Let us bow our heads in prayer. Heavenly Father, with a humble heart I thank you for the greatest gift you placed on this earth. Women. Bless every mother, the heartbeat of the home, who sacrifices her comfort so her children can rise higher. Bless every wife, the loyal crown of her husband, whose love turns a house into a heaven. Bless every daughter, a flower of joy, a treasure of laughter, and the light that carries tomorrow's hope. Bless every grandmother, the pillar of wisdom, whose prayers keep storms away from her children's doors. Women are not just part of creation, they are its foundation. They are oceans of patience, mountains of strength, rivers of compassion, and gardens of love. Father, wrap them in your eternal protection and shower them with blessings that never end. But my beloved family, I must also speak with truth. My soul feels heavy when I see so many leave the story halfway. Do you know what it feels like? It feels like I poured my heart into cooking a feast of love for you, yet you leave the table before tasting the sweetness. It hurts, because every story is my blood, my prayer, my gift to you. But still, I will never stop, because love is stronger than pain, and respect for women is greater than disappointment. To those who are new here, I know trust is not easy, but look into my heart. You will find no lies, no games, no selfishness. Only pure love for family, only honor for women, only truth in my words. If you feel this love, write present. If you stand beside me, write I am with Mr. Peter. We are not strangers. We are one heart, one family, one soul, forever united, forever blessed. We are the family of Mr. Peter. When destiny decides to destroy you, it first gives you everything you've ever dreamed of. And Patrick Mahomes was about to become Lynn Biendelow's most beautiful dream and worst nightmare. The crystal chandelier above the Grand Rosewood Hotel's ballroom cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as Lynn Biendelow adjusted her emerald silk dress, her fingers trembling from the electricity that shot through her veins every time she looked at the man who had transformed her ordinary world into pure magic. Patrick Mahomes stood across the crowded engagement party, his 6'3" frame commanding attention in his midnight blue Armani suit. But his eyes, those deep brown eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies, never left Lynn's radiant face. At 32, he owned the most prestigious, rare vintage car dealership on the West Coast and commanded respect as the city's most powerful car insurance agent. But tonight, surrounded by 300 of society's elite, he looked at Lynn like she was the only person breathing in the room. "You're staring again," whispered Jasmine, Lynn's best friend since childhood, nudging her with a knowing smile. "Honestly, the way that man looks at you should be illegal. Every woman in this room is jealous of what you two have." Lynn's heart fluttered as Patrick began walking toward her, weaving through clusters of millionaires, celebrities, and business moguls who tried to capture his attention. He moved with the confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing, but his expression held the vulnerability of someone who had finally found his missing piece. "My queen," Patrick murmured as he reached Lynn, his warm hand sliding around her waist with the gentleness of someone handling priceless porcelain. The nickname always made Lynn's cheeks flush pink, and tonight was no exception. Even after 18 months together, Patrick's touch still sent sparks through her entire body. "You look absolutely breathtaking," he whispered against her ear, his voice deep and smooth like aged whiskey. "I can't believe in 3 weeks you'll be my wife." Lynn turned in his arms, her 26-year-old face glowing with happiness that made every guest in the ballroom pause to admire the couple. I still can't believe this is real, Patrick. Sometimes I feel like I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream. Patrick's hands cupped her face tenderly, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with reverence. If this is a dream, then I never want to wake up. You, Lynn Biendolo, are my reality, my future, my everything. The orchestra began playing their song, At Last, by Etta James, and Patrick guided Lynn onto the dance floor. As they swayed together, Lynn felt like the princess she had never dared to dream of becoming. Growing up in a modest apartment with her mother Mandy, working double shifts at the local diner to pay for community college, Lynn had never imagined a life filled with private jets, designer gowns, and a man who treated her like precious treasure. "Tell me again how we met," Lynn whispered as they danced, her head resting against Patrick's chest where she could hear his steady heartbeat. Patrick chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "You were arguing with that insurance adjuster about your car accident claim, and I happened to be in the office reviewing policies. You were wearing that yellow sundress with tiny flowers, and you were so passionate about fighting for what was right that I forgot how to breathe. You interrupted a business meeting to help a stranger with her insurance claim," Lynn said, smiling at the memory. "Your secretary thought you had lost your mind." "I had," Patrick replied, spinning her gently. "I lost my mind the moment I saw you. I had everything, money, power, respect, but I was empty inside until you filled every corner of my soul with light." Across the ballroom, Mandy Biendolo watched the couple with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At 48, Mandy had maintained her striking beauty through expensive treatments and careful maintenance, her dark hair styled in elegant waves and her figure displayed in a designer dress that cost more than Lynn's monthly salary. She held a glass of champagne and nodded graciously when guests complimented her daughter's good fortune, but behind her polite facade, something darker was brewing. "Your daughter is so lucky," remarked Mrs. Wellington, a prominent socialite. "Patrick is quite the catch, handsome, wealthy, and clearly devoted." "Yes," Mandy replied carefully, her voice carrying an edge that Mrs. Wellington didn't catch. "Lynn has always been fortunate in getting what she wants." As the evening progressed, Patrick surprised Lynn with a video montage of their relationship. Their first date at the vintage car show, where he bought her a 1957 Thunderbird charm bracelet. Their romantic weekend in Napa Valley, where he proposed at sunset, and dozens of moments that showcase their deep connection. The guests applauded as Patrick took the microphone. 18 months ago, I thought I knew what love was," Patrick announced, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "I was wrong. Love isn't just attraction or compatibility or even passion. Love is finding someone who sees your soul and chooses to stay. Lynn Biendolo saw past my money, my cars, my reputation, and loved the man underneath all the wealth. She taught me that the most valuable thing I own isn't any rare automobile, it's her heart, which she's trusted me to protect forever." The crowd erupted in applause as Patrick pulled Lynn close for a kiss that made several women sigh with envy. Flashbulbs captured the moment that would later be featured in luxury lifestyle magazines as the romance of the year. "I love you beyond words, beyond reason, beyond anything I thought possible," Patrick whispered against Lynn's lips. "In 3 weeks, you'll be my wife, and I'll spend every day of my life proving I deserve the gift of your love." Lynn's eyes sparkled with tears of joy. "I love you too, Patrick. You've given me a fairy tale I never dared to dream of." But fairy tales, Lynn would soon learn, sometimes hide the darkest nightmares. As the evening wound down, Mandy approached the couple with champagne flutes and a bright smile. "To the happy couple," she toasted, her voice sweet as honey. "May your love story be everything you've dreamed of, and more." Patrick raised his glass graciously. "Thank you, Mandy. Lynn is lucky to have such a supportive mother." "Oh, I've always supported Lynn in everything," Mandy replied, her smile never faltering, even as her eyes flashed with something Patrick was too love-drunk to notice. "I'll do anything to ensure she gets exactly what she deserves." Lynn hugged her mother warmly, completely trusting the woman who had raised her alone, never suspecting that Mandy's definition of what she deserves would soon shatter both their worlds forever. The engagement party ended with guests departing into the night, all praising the perfect couple and their obvious devotion. Patrick and Lynn stood on the hotel's balcony, overlooking the city lights, wrapped in each other's arms as a gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine. 3 weeks, Patrick murmured, pressing a soft kiss to Lynn's temple. 3 weeks until you're mine forever. Forever, Lynn echoed, her heart full of love and dreams of their beautiful future. Neither of them noticed Mandy watching from the shadows inside the ballroom, her champagne glass gripped so tightly her knuckles were white, her mind already spinning with the plan that would turn their fairy tale into a nightmare. But what Mandy didn't know was that her plan for revenge would cost her more than she ever imagined, and the price would be paid in blood, tears, and a love that refused to die. Chapter 2. The Perfect Wedding Day. Heaven must have painted this morning with golden light and angel's breath, because everything looked so perfect that even God himself would have wept at its beauty. But the devil was already hiding in the details. The grand cathedral of St. Augustine stood majestically against the dawn sky, its towering spires reaching toward heaven as if blessing the union about to take place within its sacred walls. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the white marble floor where 10,000 white roses had been arranged in breathtaking displays that filled the air with intoxicating fragrance. Lynn stood in the bridal suite, surrounded by mirrors that reflected her radiance from every angle. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of silk and dreams, custom designed by renowned Italian couturier Giuseppe Romano, featuring hand-sewn diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. The dress hugged her curves perfectly before flowing into a cathedral train that seemed to float behind her like morning mist. Patrick's grandmother's diamond tiara rested atop her dark hair, which had been styled in elegant waves that cascaded over her shoulders. "You look like an angel descended from heaven," breathed Jasmine, adjusting Lynn's veil with trembling hands. "I've never seen a more beautiful bride in my entire life." The makeup artist stepped back with tears in her eyes. "In 20 years of working weddings, I've never seen such natural radiance. You're glowing from the inside out, sweetheart." Lynn's reflection showed a woman transformed by love. Her skin luminous, her eyes sparkling with joy, her smile so radiant it could have powered the cathedral's lights. She touched the diamond necklace Patrick had given her the night before, a vintage piece from 1920 that had belonged to his great-grandmother. Patrick chose this necklace because he said it was made in the year his great-grandparents got married, and they stayed together for 73 years, Lynn whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "He said he wants our love to last even longer than theirs." Meanwhile, in the cathedral, 300 elite guests filled the ornate pews. Wealthy car collectors who owned Patrick's rarest automobiles sat beside insurance executives who respected his business empire. Socialites wore designer gowns worth small fortunes, while celebrities and politicians chatted quietly about the lavish ceremony. The guest list read like a who's who of high society. Everyone wanted to witness the wedding of the year. Patrick stood at the altar in his handcrafted Italian tuxedo, the jacket tailored to perfection and adorned with platinum cufflinks that had been his father's. His dark hair was styled immaculately, and his strong jawline was clean-shaven, but his hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from pure anticipation of seeing his bride walk down the aisle. "You ready for this, brother?" asked his best man, James Rodriguez, who had been Patrick's friend since college. "You look like you're about to jump out of your skin." Patrick adjusted his platinum tie clip, a gift from Lynn that bore their initials intertwined. "I've been ready for this moment since the day I met her, James. Lynn is my everything, my heart, my soul, my reason for living. I can't wait to call her my wife." The 12-piece orchestra, flown in specially from Vienna, began tuning their instruments as the wedding coordinator checked every detail one final time. Golden candles flickered along the aisle, their warm light mixing with the natural sunlight to create an ethereal glow. White silk ribbons adorned every pew, and the altar was decorated with cascading arrangements of white orchids and roses that Patrick had personally selected because they were Lynn's favorites. In the back of the cathedral, Mandy Biendolo stood before a mirror in the mother's dressing room, adjusting her sophisticated navy blue dress, a designer piece that Patrick had insisted on purchasing for her. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant updo, and her makeup was flawless, but her eyes held an intensity that would have alarmed anyone paying close attention. "You look stunning, Mandy," said Rebecca, Lynn's aunt, as she entered the room. "Your daughter is so lucky to have such a beautiful, supportive mother walking her down the aisle today." "Lucky," Mandy repeated softly, her reflection showing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, Lynn has always been very lucky." Rebecca studied Mandy's expression with concern. "Are you all right, honey?" "You seem tense." Mandy turned from the mirror with a brilliant smile that transformed her entire demeanor. "I'm perfect, Rebecca. Just emotional about giving away my little girl to such a wonderful man. Patrick is everything a mother could want for her daughter, wealthy, handsome, successful. And completely devoted to Lynn," Rebecca added warmly. "I've never seen a man so in love. The way he looks at her is like she hung the moon and stars." "Yes," Mandy agreed, her voice carrying an odd note that Rebecca couldn't quite identify. "Patrick certainly knows how to appreciate beautiful women." The organ began playing the processional, and guests rose to their feet in anticipation. The massive cathedral doors opened to reveal 6 flower girls in white dresses, scattering rose petals down the aisle while carrying baskets of baby's breath. Behind them walked 8 bridesmaids in flowing lavender gowns, each carrying bouquets of white peonies tied with silk ribbons. Patrick's breath caught in his throat as the music swelled, knowing that any moment he would see his bride. His heart pounded so hard he was certain everyone in the cathedral could hear it echoing off the stone walls. "This is it," James whispered. "Your queen is about to make her entrance." The orchestra reached crescendo as every guest turned toward the cathedral doors, cameras ready to capture the moment when Lynn would appear in all her bridal glory. The air itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of witnessing a love story that would be remembered for generations. Sunlight streamed through the massive stained glass windows, creating a pathway of colored light down the marble aisle, where Lynn would soon walk toward her dreams. The scent of thousands of roses filled the sacred space, and even the stone angels carved into the cathedral walls seemed to smile down upon the gathering. Patrick straightened his shoulders and took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the entrance where his bride would appear. In moments, he would see the woman who had taught him what it meant to love completely, and their fairy tale would reach its perfect conclusion. The organ music paused for one heartbeat, and then the wedding march began. But in the bridal suite, something was terribly wrong. Jasmine had just pulled Lynn aside with urgent whispers, her face pale with shock and her hands shaking as she delivered news that would turn the most perfect day into the most devastating nightmare. "Lynn," Jasmine whispered, her voice barely audible over the wedding march echoing through the cathedral. "I need to tell you something before you walk down that aisle. Something about Patrick and your mother." Lynn's radiant smile began to fade as Jasmine's words hit her like ice water, and the fairy tale that had seemed so perfect moments before started cracking like fragile glass. The congregation waited in beautiful anticipation, completely unaware that their picture-perfect wedding was about to become the most shocking scandal their society had ever witnessed. What secret had Jasmine discovered that could destroy a love this powerful? And why was Mandy smiling like a woman who held all the cards in a deadly game she was about to win? Chapter 3. The Calculated Seduction. Some betrayals cut like knives, but others detonate like bombs, and Mandy Biendolo had just lit the fuse that would destroy everything Lynn had ever believed about love, family, and herself. The bridal suite fell into deadly silence as Jasmine's words hung in the air like poison gas. Lynn's radiant smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of confusion and growing horror that made Jasmine's heart break for her best friend. "What did you just say?" Lynn whispered, her voice barely audible over the wedding march playing in the cathedral. Her hands began trembling so violently that her bouquet of white roses shook like leaves in a hurricane. Jasmine took a shaky breath, tears already forming in her eyes. "Lynn, I overheard your mother on the phone this morning. She was talking to someone about Patrick, and she said she slept with him at your engagement party 3 weeks ago." The words hit Lynn like a physical blow. Her knees buckled and she would have collapsed if not for grabbing the marble vanity table. The diamond tiara slipped slightly on her head as she stared at Jasmine in disbelief. "That's impossible," Lynn gasped, shaking her head frantically. "Jasmine, you must have misunderstood. My mother would never, Patrick would never. We're getting married in 10 minutes. "I heard her clearly, Lynn. She was laughing about it, saying she taught you a lesson about trusting people too easily. She said she planned everything perfectly, that she seduced Patrick deliberately when he was drinking alone in the garden during your engagement party." Lynn's reflection in the mirror showed a bride transforming into a broken woman before her very eyes. Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the devastation spreading across her features like a storm cloud covering the sun. "Planned?" Lynn whispered, her voice hollow with shock. "She planned to seduce my fiancé. According to what I heard, she wanted to destroy your happiness," Jasmine continued reluctantly. "She said something about you not deserving the fairy tale life when she never had one. Lynn, she wasn't trying to steal Patrick, she was trying to ruin your wedding day." The full scope of her mother's cruelty hit Lynn like a tsunami. This wasn't a moment of weakness or jealousy. It was calculated destruction designed to demolish her daughter's dreams on the most important day of her life. "She wanted to humiliate me," Lynn said, her voice growing stronger as understanding dawned. "She wanted to destroy my perfect day because she couldn't stand seeing me happy." "What are you going to do?" Jasmine asked nervously, recognizing the dangerous glint in Lynn's eyes. Lynn straightened her tiara and smoothed her wedding dress, her devastation transforming into something cold and powerful. "If Mother wants public humiliation, then that's exactly what she'll get. But it won't be mine." "Lynn, what do you mean?" Jasmine gasped, but Lynn was already moving toward the door with purposeful strides. "I'm going to give everyone exactly what they came to see," Lynn said, her voice calm but filled with steel. "A wedding they'll never forget." In the cathedral, Patrick stood at the altar checking his platinum watch. The bride was 5 minutes late, but he wasn't worried. Lynn was worth waiting for forever. He had no idea that his moment of weakness 3 weeks ago was about to destroy everything he held sacred. The massive cathedral doors opened with ceremonial flourish, and the congregation rose to their feet in unison. Lynn appeared in the doorway like a vision from heaven itself, her smile radiant as she began her walk down the rose-petal-strewn aisle. Patrick's breath caught in his throat. His bride looked absolutely ethereal, and his heart swelled with so much love he thought it might burst. He had no idea he was watching an angel walking toward his judgment. Lynn reached the altar where Patrick waited with pure adoration shining in his eyes. Father Michael smiled warmly at the radiant couple as the music faded into reverent silence. "Dearly beloved," Father Michael began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Patrick and Lynn in holy matrimony." Patrick's eyes never left Lynn's face, completely unaware of the storm about to break over his head. "If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace," Father Michael continued. Instead of the traditional silence, Lynn stepped forward and turned to face the congregation, her smile remaining radiant, but her eyes holding fire that could have melted steel. "Actually, Father Michael," Lynn said, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral's perfect acoustics, "before we exchange vows, I believe our guests deserve to know something important about my groom and my mother." A murmur rippled through the congregation as 300 faces turned toward the bride with curiosity and growing confusion. Patrick's face began to pale as he realized something was terribly wrong. "3 weeks ago, at our engagement party," Lynn continued, her voice growing stronger and clearer, "while I was inside getting ready for photos, my beloved groom shared an intimate encounter with my mother in the garden." The cathedral erupted into shocked gasps, dropped programs and frantic whispers as the congregation processed the devastating revelation. Camera flashes began popping like fireworks as society reporters realized they were witnessing the scandal of the decade. Patrick's face went completely white, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as he stared at Lynn in absolute horror. "Lynn, please, let me explain." "Oh, there's more," Lynn said with a smile that could have frozen hellfire. "This wasn't a moment of weakness or mistake. My mother planned this seduction deliberately to destroy our wedding day because she couldn't bear to see me happy." The congregation erupted into fresh chaos as they realized they weren't just witnessing betrayal, they were seeing calculated family destruction unfold in real time. "So instead of saying I do to a man who was weak enough to be manipulated by my own mother," Lynn announced with devastating calm, "I'm saying I'm done to both of them." She removed the enormous diamond engagement ring with ceremonial slowness, holding it up so every guest could see the symbol of Patrick's broken promises, then placed it on the marble altar beside the unity candles. "The wedding is over," Lynn declared, "but my mother's show is just beginning." Patrick fell to his knees on the cold marble floor, his expensive tuxedo crumpling as he reached desperately toward Lynn. "Please, my love, don't do this." "I was manipulated, but that doesn't excuse my weakness." But Lynn was already walking away, her cathedral train flowing behind her like liquid silk, leaving Patrick kneeling alone in front of 300 witnesses to his destruction. The perfect revenge was complete. Mandy's plan to humiliate Lynn had backfired spectacularly, turning instead into Patrick's public destruction and Lynn's triumphant exit. But Mandy wasn't finished with her cruel games, and the real explosion was about to tear Lynn's world apart in ways that would make Patrick's betrayal seem like a gentle rain compared to the hurricane coming next. Chapter 4. The Mother's Explosion. Hell hath no fury like a mother scorned, but when that mother is Mandy Biendolo, fury becomes a weapon sharp enough to slice through a daughter's soul and leave scars that will never heal. The cathedral remained in stunned chaos as Lynn's footsteps echoed off the marble floor, each step taking her further from the altar where Patrick knelt in devastation. But before she could reach the massive doors, a voice cut through the confusion like a blade through silk. "How dare you expose me?" The venomous scream came from Mandy Biendolo, who had risen from her front row pew like a serpent whose hiding place had been discovered. Her sophisticated facade had completely shattered, revealing the twisted psychology that had been lurking beneath her maternal smile for years. Her navy blue designer dress seemed to ripple with the fury radiating from her trembling body. Lynn stopped dead in her tracks, turning slowly to face the woman who had raised her. The congregation, which had been buzzing with shocked whispers, fell into absolute silence as they sensed something even more explosive was about to unfold. "Mother?" Lynn said, her voice uncertain as she saw an expression on Mandy's face that revealed the true monster underneath the loving mother mask. Mandy stepped into the aisle, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the vicious sneer that transformed her beautiful features into something frighteningly unrecognizable. "You ungrateful little brat!" Mandy shrieked, her voice echoing off the cathedral's stone walls. "You think you can humiliate me in front of all these people? You think you can ruin my perfect plan with your dramatic scene?" The 300 guests leaned forward in their pews, mesmerized by the psychological warfare unfolding before them. Camera phones appeared in dozens of hands as society's elite realized they were witnessing a complete family implosion that would make headlines worldwide. Lynn stared at her mother in growing horror as the woman she had trusted her entire life revealed her true nature. "Your perfect plan was to destroy my wedding day, to seduce Patrick just to hurt me?" Mandy's laugh was sharp and maniacal, echoing through the sacred space like the sound of sanity breaking. "Of course it was. Did you really think I would just stand by and watch you get everything I was denied? Did you think I would smile and pretend to be happy while you lived like a princess?" Father Michael stepped forward nervously, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please, let's move this discussion somewhere private." "No!" Mandy snapped, her eyes blazing with years of accumulated resentment. "Everyone here needs to understand exactly why this spoiled brat deserved to have her fairy tale destroyed." Patrick struggled to his feet, his legs weak with shock as he began to comprehend the true depth of Mandy's psychological manipulation. "You planned everything just to hurt your own daughter. What kind of mother does that? The kind who spent 26 years watching an unwanted child get opportunities I never had." Mandy whirled on Patrick with fury that made him recoil. "You were just a tool, you pathetic man. I used your weakness and insecurity to teach my daughter that she's not special enough for fairy tale endings." The cathedral erupted in horrified gasps as the congregation realized they were witnessing pure maternal evil. This wasn't jealousy or passion, it was calculated psychological abuse disguised as life lessons. Lynn felt her world tilting as her mother's twisted logic was exposed in front of hundreds of witnesses. "You used Patrick to hurt me because you're jealous of my happiness." Jealous? Mandy's voice rose to a shriek that made several guests cover their ears. "I'm not jealous, I'm realistic. I wanted to show you that men like Patrick don't really love girls like us. We're not fairy tale princesses. We're burdens who should be grateful for whatever scraps we get." The congregation was witnessing something beyond family drama. They were seeing the complete psychological breakdown of a woman whose resentment had festered into pure malice toward her own child. "But since you forced me to reveal my teaching methods," Mandy continued, her voice taking on a tone of vicious satisfaction, "let me give everyone the full lesson about who you really are." Lynn's blood turned to ice as she recognized the look in her mother's eyes, the same expression Mandy had worn before delivering the cruelest punishments during Lynn's childhood. "She has no right to give me lessons about ethics," Mandy screamed, pointing an accusing finger at Lynn while addressing the entire congregation. "She is the illegal child of my ex-boyfriend, not from any orphanage like I told everyone. I was 17 and stupid, and I got pregnant by a man who abandoned me the moment he learned about the baby." Lynn's knees gave out completely, and she collapsed onto the rose-covered aisle as her entire identity was stripped away in front of hundreds of strangers. The diamond tiara that had made her feel like a princess scattered pieces across the marble floor, each broken crystal reflecting the shattered fragments of her life. "I carried her as a burden for 26 years. Mandy continued mercilessly, her voice growing stronger as she fed off the shock and horror in her audience. I sacrificed my teenage years, my figure, my social life, my chances at finding real love, all for an ungrateful child who was the product of one stupid night with a boy who ran away. The revelation hit the congregation like a bomb. Whispers exploded throughout the pews as society's elite processed the shocking truth, their phones recording every second of Lynn's complete humiliation. Patrick moved toward Lynn instinctively, wanting to protect her from the psychological assault, but Mandy wasn't finished with her destruction. "I gave up everything for her," Mandy shrieked, her composure completely gone as years of hidden resentment poured out like toxic waste. "I worked 3 jobs to pay for her food, her clothes, her education. I told people she was an orphan I adopted to make her seem special, to give her a better story than the truth. The truth being that you resented every moment of raising me," Lynn whispered from where she knelt on the floor, her voice broken but still carrying. "Yes," Mandy screamed, finally admitting what she had hidden for decades. "I resented every diaper, every sleepless night, every dollar I spent on you instead of myself. I resented watching you grow up beautiful and hopeful when I was trapped and bitter." The cathedral was in complete chaos now. Guests stood in their pews, shouting in outrage at Mandy's cruelty. Several women were crying openly, and men were shaking their heads in disgust at witnessing such maternal abuse. "And now she dares to expose my teaching methods?" Mandy continued, completely lost in her own twisted justification. "I seduced Patrick to show her that men can't be trusted, that love is a lie, and that she's nothing special, just like I learned when her father abandoned me." "You're sick," Patrick said, his voice filled with horror and disgust. "You used your own psychological damage to torture your daughter. I thought you were a grieving mother. I had no idea you were a predator using her own wedding to destroy her." "I'm realistic," Mandy shot back. "I saved her from years of disappointment by showing her the truth early. Men like you don't stay faithful to girls like us. You proved that when you fell for my seduction." Lynn struggled to her feet, her wedding dress torn and stained, but her eyes now burning with understanding instead of confusion. "You didn't teach me about men, Mother. You taught me about you. You showed me that some people are so broken by their own pain that they destroy everyone around them." "I taught you reality," Mandy screamed, but her voice was becoming shrill and desperate as she realized the congregation was looking at her with revulsion instead of understanding. "You taught me that having a child doesn't automatically make someone a mother," Lynn replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Real mothers protect their children's hearts. They don't use them for target practice." The congregation murmured agreement, clearly siding with Lynn against her abusive mother. Mandy looked around at the faces staring at her with disgust and horror, suddenly realizing that her moment of victory had become her own public exposure as a psychological abuser. "I did everything for you." Mandy tried one last desperate justification, but her voice cracked with the knowledge that she had lost every ally in the room. "You did everything to me," Lynn corrected, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "There's a difference." With that final truth hanging in the air like a judgment, Mandy gathered her purse with shaking hands and pushed through the crowd toward the exit. But instead of the triumphant departure she had planned, she fled like the exposed abuser she was, leaving behind a congregation that now understood they had witnessed not family drama, but years of psychological torture finally coming to light. Lynn stood in the ruins of her wedding, surrounded by scattered rose petals and broken dreams, but for the first time in her life, she felt free from her mother's manipulation. Patrick remained kneeling on the marble floor, his face buried in his hands, as he realized he had been used as a weapon in Mandy's war against her own daughter, a war that had been raging long before he ever entered their lives. The wedding was destroyed, the truth was exposed, and both Lynn and Patrick were broken. But sometimes, complete destruction is the only way to clear the ground for something entirely new to grow. As the cathedral emptied and the scandal spread across social media, neither Lynn nor Patrick knew that their real love story was about to begin, not with fairy tale perfection, but with two wounded souls learning to trust again in a world where even mothers could be monsters. Chapter 5. The Broken Millionaire. When a king loses his crown, he becomes just a man. But when Patrick Mahomes lost Lynn, he discovered that even infinite wealth couldn't buy back a single heartbeat of the love he had destroyed. The grand cathedral emptied slowly as guests filed out in clusters, their voices buzzing with excitement over witnessing the scandal of the century. But Patrick remained kneeling at the altar, his expensive tuxedo wrinkled and his face buried in his hands, as the full weight of his manipulation and Lynn's devastation crashed down upon him like an avalanche. "Patrick," James whispered, kneeling beside his devastated friend, "we need to get you out of here. The reporters are going crazy outside, and social media is already exploding with videos." But Patrick didn't move. He stared at the diamond engagement ring Lynn had left on the marble altar, the ring he had chosen after visiting 12 different jewelers to find the perfect symbol of their eternal love. Now it lay abandoned like his heart, catching the colored light from the stained glass windows and mocking him with its brilliance. "She's gone," Patrick whispered, his voice breaking like a teenage boy's. "The love of my life is gone, and I was too weak to protect her from her own mother's evil." "Brother, you were manipulated by a psychopath," James said gently. "Mandy planned everything. You were a victim too." Patrick's head snapped up, his eyes red with unshed tears and blazing with self-hatred. "A victim? I'm a grown man who built a business empire from nothing, and I let a manipulative woman seduce me because she told me what I wanted to hear about being worthy of passion. I'm not a victim, James. I'm a fool who became a weapon in a war against the woman I love." Meanwhile, Lynn had fled to her Aunt Rebecca's house in the suburbs, still wearing her torn wedding dress, as she collapsed onto the familiar couch where she had spent childhood afternoons reading fairy tales. Rebecca, a gentle woman in her 50s who had always been more of a mother to Lynn than Mandy, wrapped her niece in blankets and held her while she sobbed. "I don't understand any of this," Lynn cried into Rebecca's shoulder. "How could Mother plan something so cruel? How could Patrick be weak enough to fall for it?" Rebecca stroked Lynn's hair gently, her own heart breaking for the girl she had helped raise. "Honey, some people are so damaged by their own pain that they spread it like a disease. Your mother has been bitter and resentful since the day you were born, and today she finally showed her true colors." "But Patrick," Lynn sobbed, "he said he loved me, promised to protect me, and then he let her seduce him because he was insecure." "Sweetie," Rebecca said firmly, "that man was manipulated by someone who's had 26 years to perfect the art of psychological warfare. Your mother knew exactly which buttons to push to make him doubt himself." Lynn's cousin Maria arrived within the hour, having seen the viral videos already spreading across social media. At 30, Maria was a successful lawyer who had always been protective of Lynn like an older sister. "That witch finally showed her true face," Maria said bluntly, settling beside Lynn on the couch. "But honey, you need to understand something important. Patrick was played by a master manipulator. That doesn't excuse his weakness, but it explains it." "Everyone keeps saying he was manipulated," Lynn said, looking between her aunt and cousin. "But he still made the choice to betray me." "He made a stupid choice when he was drunk and being psychologically manipulated by someone who knew his insecurities," Maria corrected. "Your mother spent months studying that man, learning his fears and weaknesses, so she could use them against both of you." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "Mandy has been jealous of your happiness since you started dating Patrick. I saw it in her eyes every time she talked about your relationship, like she was planning something terrible." "So, what do I do now?" Lynn asked, feeling lost and broken in ways she had never experienced. "You heal," Rebecca said firmly. You focus on recovering from the trauma of having both your fiancé and your mother betray you in different ways, and you remember that what happened today says nothing about your worth. It says everything about their brokenness. Meanwhile, across the city, Patrick was experiencing his own version of hell. He had returned to his mansion, but the enormous house felt like a tomb filled with ghosts of Lynn's laughter and love. Every room contained memories that now felt like accusations. The kitchen where Lynn used to make breakfast while humming off-key. The library where she would read poetry aloud while he pretended to work. The garden where Mandy had seduced him while Lynn was inside trusting them both. Patrick sat in his study, surrounded by photos of Lynn during their happiest moments, each image a knife twisting in his chest. He pulled out his laptop and began typing the first of what would become dozens of desperate letters. My dearest Lynn, I know I have no right to contact you after allowing myself to become a weapon in your mother's war against you. But I can't breathe without telling you how sorry I am. I was weak, insecure, and stupid enough to believe Mandy's lies about not being worthy of your love. I replay that night 1,000 times, wishing I could go back and see through her manipulation. I wish I could die instead of having caused you this pain. You trusted me to protect your heart, and instead I handed it to your worst enemy to destroy. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm going to spend every day of my life trying to become worthy of the love you gave me. Without you, nothing else has any meaning. Forever yours, even if you can never be mine, Patrick. The next morning brought Patrick's nightmare into sharp focus. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from business associates, reporters, and former friends who wanted to gossip about his public humiliation. Social media exploded with memes mocking the millionaire who got played by his mother-in-law. At the prestigious Motors Country Club, where Patrick had been a respected member for years, his former associates gathered around the bar with cruel amusement in their voices. Can you believe Patrick Mahomes got seduced by his fiancée's mother? Laughed Richard Steinberg, a rival car dealer. The man who thought he was too smart to be fooled by anyone. I heard the mother planned the whole thing just to destroy the wedding, added Thomas Crawford, a prominent insurance executive. That's some serious psychological warfare. The girl left him at the altar in front of 300 people. His reputation is finished. My wife says the daughter should run as far as possible and never look back, chimed in William Foster, another wealthy businessman. Once a man shows he can be manipulated that easily, he'll fall for the next pretty face with a sob story. The whole family sounds toxic, agreed Robert Winchester, sipping his whiskey. The mother's a predator, the daughter's a drama queen, and Patrick's too weak to handle either of them. He's better off alone. But Patrick wasn't at the country club to hear their mockery. He was at his dealership, liquidating his prized collection of vintage cars with mechanical precision. Each sale felt like cutting off a piece of his identity, but material possessions meant nothing when the woman he loved was suffering because of his weakness. Sir, are you sure about selling the 1967 Shelby Cobra? Asked his sales manager, David Torres. You've turned down $1 million offers for that car. Sell everything, Patrick replied, his voice hollow as he signed paperwork. Donate the proceeds to orphanages and women's shelters. Maybe some good can come from my mistakes. David studied his boss with concern. Patrick, you're making emotional decisions. Maybe wait a few weeks before... I don't have a few weeks, Patrick interrupted, his voice cracking. Every day Lynn suffers because of what I did is another day I prove I don't deserve to breathe the same air as her. That afternoon brought the first of fate's cruel interventions. Patrick was leaving the bank after liquidating another account when he literally collided with Lynn outside Morrison's grocery store. She was carrying bags that scattered across the sidewalk as they both stumbled from the impact. I'm so sorry, Patrick began automatically, then froze as he realized who he had bumped into. Lynn stared up at him from where she had fallen, her eyes wide with shock at the unexpected encounter. For a moment, They were both frozen in time, surrounded by scattered groceries and the weight of everything unsaid between them. "Are you hurt?" Patrick asked, immediately kneeling to help gather her fallen items, his hands shaking as he tried to focus on being helpful instead of staring at her beautiful face. "I'm fine," Lynn said quickly, but her voice trembled as she watched Patrick carefully placing her groceries back in their bags. His hands were gentle and respectful, never touching hers, maintaining careful distance even while helping her. "Here," Patrick said softly, placing the last apple in her bag. "Everything should be there." "Thank you," Lynn whispered, the automatic politeness feeling strange after everything that had happened between them. They stood up simultaneously, now facing each other on the busy sidewalk, while other shoppers flowed around them like water around stones. Patrick looked terrible. His usually immaculate appearance was replaced by rumpled clothes, exhaustion, and eyes that held the kind of pain that changes a person fundamentally. "Lynn," Patrick said, her name escaping his lips like a prayer he couldn't stop himself from whispering. "Don't," Lynn said quickly, but her voice lacked the venom she intended. Seeing Patrick looking so broken and humble stirred something in her chest that she desperately wanted to ignore. "I just want you to know," Patrick said, his voice barely audible over the street traffic, "that I understand what your mother did to both of us. I was weak and fell for her manipulation, but you were her real target. I'm sorry I became the weapon she used to hurt you." Before Lynn could respond, her phone rang loudly, providing the perfect excuse to escape the emotionally charged encounter. She grabbed her groceries and fled to her car, leaving Patrick standing alone on the sidewalk, watching her drive away with the expression of a man watching his soul disappear into traffic. But neither of them noticed the dark sedan parked across the street, or Mandy sitting behind the wheel with a satisfied smile as she observed their first encounter since the wedding. Her plan to keep them tortured but apart was working perfectly, and she had more cruel surprises planned for both of them. 2 days later, fate struck again at First National Bank. Lynn had come during her lunch break to close the joint savings account she had shared with Patrick, a painful but necessary step toward erasing him from her life. As she waited in line, rehearsing the words she would use to explain the account closure, a familiar voice behind her made her spine stiffen with recognition. "I'd like to make a donation to the Sunshine Orphanage," Patrick said to the teller, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept in weeks. $10 million from my business liquidation account." Lynn turned slowly, unable to believe fate could be so cruel twice in 1 week. Patrick stood directly behind her in line, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans instead of his usual expensive suits. He looked like he had lost weight, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. But what struck Lynn most was the resignation in his posture, like a man who had given up on everything except making amends. "10 million?" the teller asked, her voice rising with surprise. "Sir, are you certain about that amount?" "Make it 15 million, Patrick said without hesitation, his eyes meeting Lynn's across the small space between them. The Sunshine Orphanage helps children who were abandoned by their fathers. Since I understand what it feels like to fail someone you're supposed to protect, maybe my money can prevent other children from suffering." Lynn's chest tightened as she realized the implication. Patrick was donating his fortune to orphanages because of her, because Mandy had revealed the lie about Lynn's orphan background, and Patrick was trying to honor the story that had been stolen from her. "Patrick," Lynn said softly, his name slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness," Patrick said quickly, stepping closer as other bank customers began recognizing them from viral wedding videos. "I'm trying to become the kind of man who deserves to exist in the same world as you." "By giving away your fortune?" Lynn asked, confusion mixing with the anger she was trying desperately to maintain. By learning that the only thing of real value I ever had was your love, Patrick replied, his voice raw with honesty. Money, cars, reputation, none of it brought me happiness. Only you did that, and I threw it away because I was too insecure to believe I deserved it. Their conversation was interrupted by other customers who recognized them, some offering Lynn sympathy, and others staring with morbid curiosity at the infamous couple. The attention made Lynn uncomfortable, reminding her that their private pain had become public entertainment. I have to go, Lynn said, backing toward the exit while keeping her eyes on Patrick's devastated face. I understand, Patrick replied, not trying to follow her. But Lynn, please know that every day I live with what I did to you, every dollar I give away, every moment I spend trying to become better. It's all because loving you taught me what really matters. Even if you never forgive me, you changed me forever. Lynn fled the bank with Patrick's words echoing in her mind, his genuine regret and transformation creating cracks in the armor of anger she was trying to maintain around her shattered heart. That evening, as Lynn sat in Rebecca's kitchen picking at homemade soup, her phone rang with calls from more family friends who had seen the viral wedding videos. "Lynn, darling, it's Cousin David from Chicago," came the voice through speakerphone. "I just saw what happened and I'm flying in tomorrow. No man, rich or poor, treats our family like that and gets away with it." "Thank you, David," Lynn said tiredly. "But there's nothing you can do. It's over." "Over?" David's voice rose with indignation. "Honey, a man who falls for your mother's manipulation will fall for anyone's manipulation. You dodged a bullet. Find someone with a stronger backbone." The next call came from family friend Pastor Williams, who had known Lynn since childhood. "Sweet girl, I've been praying for you since I heard the news. Remember that God sometimes protects us by revealing people's true nature before we bind ourselves to them legally. This Patrick fellow showed you who he really is. Believe him." Even strangers began approaching Lynn at work, in coffee shops, and on the street. Word had spread about the viral wedding scandal, and everyone had opinions about her situation. "I saw your wedding video online," said Janet, a co-worker at Lynn's marketing job. "Honey, you handled that with such class. Any man weak enough to be seduced by his fiancé's mother isn't worth the tissues you cried into." "My grandmother always said once a cheater, always a cheater," added Mike, another colleague. "Doesn't matter if he was manipulated, he still made the choice to betray you." But not everyone agreed. At the coffee shop where Lynn tried to find solace in anonymity, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson approached her table with gentle eyes. "Excuse me, dear, but I couldn't help recognizing you from the news," the woman said kindly. "I wanted you to know that sometimes good men make terrible mistakes when they're being manipulated by evil people. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it might explain it." Lynn looked up at the stranger with surprise. "You think I should forgive him?" "I think you should heal first," Mrs. Patterson replied wisely. "But don't let one person's evil poison your ability to recognize genuine remorse when you see it. I've been married for 52 years, and I've learned that love sometimes requires forgiving the unforgivable." These conflicting opinions created a storm in Lynn's mind as she tried to process not just Patrick's betrayal, but the revelation about her parentage and her mother's years of hidden resentment. Every person who offered advice forced her to examine her situation from new angles, making her healing process even more complicated. Meanwhile, Patrick was experiencing his own version of hell, multiplied by public humiliation. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from business associates, reporters, and former friends who wanted to dissect his destruction. At Rodriguez Auto Repair, where Patrick had taken a job to learn honest labor, his co-workers treated him with mixture of sympathy and confusion. "Boss, why are you really here?" asked Miguel, a master mechanic who had been working on cars for 30 years. "You're a millionaire businessman. This doesn't make sense." Patrick looked up from the engine he was rebuilding, his expensive watches replaced by work gloves and his hands already stained with grease. "I'm here because the man who owned all those businesses was weak enough to hurt the most important person in his life. I need to learn what it means to earn something instead of buying it." "You're punishing yourself," observed Carlos, another mechanic. "Rich guy guilt doesn't fix broken hearts, man." "I'm not punishing myself," Patrick replied, his honesty cutting through their skepticism. "I'm trying to become someone worthy of the love I destroyed. The woman I hurt deserves to know that her love changed me, even if she never wants to see me again." His transformation continued with relentless dedication. Patrick sold his mansion and moved to a modest apartment, traded his collection of luxury cars for a simple Honda, and began working 18-hour days split between the garage and volunteer work at homeless shelters. But fate seemed determined to torture both him and Lynn with constant reminders of what they had lost. The next cruel encounter happened at Metropolitan General Hospital, where both had come to visit sick relatives on the same day. Lynn was leaving her grandfather's room when she rounded a corner and walked straight into Patrick, who was carrying flowers for his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, from his apartment building. "Oh!" Lynn gasped, stumbling backward as their unexpected collision sent both their emotions into chaos. "Lynn!" Patrick breathed, dropping the flowers as instinct made him reach out to steady her, then pulling his hands back when he remembered he had no right to touch her anymore. They stood in the hospital corridor, surrounded by the antiseptic smell and fluorescent lighting that made everything feel stark and unforgiving. Patrick looked exhausted and humble, his expensive clothes replaced by simple jeans and a work shirt that smelled faintly of motor oil. "What are you doing here?" Lynn asked, trying to keep her voice steady while her heart raced from the unexpected encounter. "Visiting Mrs. Chen," Patrick replied, gesturing toward the scattered flowers. "She's been in the hospital for a week with pneumonia, and she doesn't have any family to check on her." The simple kindness of his action, visiting a lonely elderly neighbor, struck Lynn as completely different from the Patrick she remembered, who had been generous but practical about charity. This man seemed to be learning compassion from personal experience with loss and loneliness. "Your grandfather?" Patrick asked gently, noticing Lynn's red-rimmed eyes. "Recovering from heart surgery," Lynn replied automatically, then caught herself opening up to the man who had betrayed her. "I should go." "Of course," Patrick said, immediately stepping aside to give her clear passage. "I hope he recovers quickly. Family is precious." The weight of everything unspoken hung between them as Lynn walked away, leaving Patrick to gather the scattered flowers alone in the hospital corridor, both of them shaken by how much pain a simple accidental encounter could generate. That night, Lynn sat in her apartment, reading more advice from well-meaning friends and family. Text messages poured in from relatives across the country who had seen the viral videos. Aunt Susan from Portland, "Sweetheart, men who cheat before the wedding will cheat after. You're young and beautiful. Find someone worthy of your heart." Uncle Robert from Denver, "That boy showed his true colors when tested. Character is revealed under pressure, and his character failed the test." But mixed in with the condemnation were other voices. Family friend Mrs. Rodriguez, "Sometimes good people make terrible choices when they're hurting inside. Not saying you should forgive, just saying people can change if the regret is genuine." Neighbor Tom from down the hall, "I've been watching the news coverage and that man looks like someone who's genuinely suffering for his mistake." Not all regret is fake, honey. The conflicting advice created a symphony of confusion in Lynn's mind as she struggled to separate genuine wisdom from well-meaning but misguided opinions. Everyone wanted to protect her, but no one could help her understand the battle raging in her own heart between love and betrayal. As she prepared for bed, Lynn found herself standing at her window, looking out at the city lights and wondering if Patrick was somewhere out there, staring at the same stars and feeling the same agonizing mix of love and loss that kept her awake every night. She didn't know that Patrick was indeed awake, sitting in his sparse apartment, writing in the journal that had become his only confidant. Day 4, without Lynn. I sold the Lamborghini collection today and donated the money to 3 different charities in her honor. James thinks I'm having a breakdown, but I've never seen more clearly. The man who owned those cars was someone I don't want to be anymore. I dream about her every night, and I wake up hating myself more each morning. But I also wake up more determined to become worthy of the love she gave me, even if she never gives it again. Tomorrow I start working at the garage. Maybe honest work will teach me what real value means. Neither Lynn nor Patrick knew that their agonizing separation was being orchestrated by someone who took pleasure in their pain, or that their next encounter would be even more emotionally devastating than the ones before. But fate was preparing to test them in ways that would reveal whether their love was strong enough to survive not just betrayal and manipulation, but the cruelest enemy of all, time and the growing distance between 2 hearts that still beat for each other. Chapter 6. Fate's Cruel Games. They say you can't escape destiny, but Lynn and Patrick were about to discover that sometimes destiny is a cruel puppet master who delights in forcing broken hearts to dance together in the ruins of their shattered dreams. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding disaster, and Lynn had convinced herself that avoiding Patrick Mahomes would be simple in a city of 2 million people. She was devastatingly wrong. The first cruel twist of fate struck at Morrison's grocery on a rainy Tuesday morning. Lynn had specifically chosen the early hour and distant location to avoid running into anyone from her former social circle. She pushed her cart through the produce section, her head covered by a silk scarf and her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, trying to remain invisible to the world that had witnessed her humiliation. She was reaching for organic apples when another cart slammed into hers with enough force to send oranges rolling across the polished floor. Lynn looked up in annoyance, ready to offer a polite apology, and found herself staring directly into the devastated brown eyes of Patrick Mahomes. Time stopped. The grocery store faded away as they stood frozen, separated by 2 shopping carts, but connected by 18 months of memories that hung between them like invisible chains. Patrick looked terrible. His usually immaculate appearance was replaced by day-old stubble, wrinkled clothes, and eyes that held the kind of pain that changes a person forever. "Lynn," he breathed, her name escaping his lips like a prayer he had been whispering for weeks. Lynn's carefully constructed composure crumbled instantly. The sight of Patrick, thinner, broken, and clearly suffering, hit her like a physical blow. Her hands began trembling as she gripped her cart's handle, fighting the urge to either run away or collapse into his arms. "Don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the store's soft background music. "Don't say my name like that." "I can't help it," Patrick replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the only prayer I know anymore." Other shoppers began noticing the tension between them, some recognizing the infamous couple from viral wedding videos that had dominated social media for weeks. Whispers started spreading through the store as people pulled out phones to record the unexpected encounter. Lynn became aware of the growing attention and felt her cheeks burn with fresh humiliation. "People are staring," she said, adjusting her scarf nervously. "Let them stare," Patrick said, stepping closer despite the shopping carts between them. "Lynn, please, just give me 5 minutes to explain what really happened that night." "Explain?" Lynn's voice rose sharply, causing nearby shoppers to turn and openly gawk. "You want to explain how you slept with my mother? How you both planned to humiliate me?" "I never planned anything," Patrick protested desperately. "Your mother manipulated me when I was vulnerable and drunk. I was thinking about our wedding, terrified I wasn't good enough for you, and she used that fear against me." Lynn's eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall in public. "You were terrified of not being good enough, so you proved it by betraying me with the woman who raised me. That's your explanation? The words hit Patrick like bullets, each one finding its mark in his already shattered heart. I know how it sounds. I know there's no excuse for my weakness. But Lynn, I love you more than my own life. That night meant nothing. You are everything. Stop, Lynn said, backing away from him as emotions threatened to overwhelm her completely. Stop saying you love me. Love doesn't do what you did. Love doesn't destroy the person it claims to cherish. She abandoned her cart and rushed toward the exit, leaving Patrick standing alone among scattered oranges and the curious stares of shoppers who had just witnessed round one of what would become an epic battle between love and betrayal. Patrick didn't follow her. Instead, he knelt on the grocery store floor and began picking up the oranges that had spilled from Lynn's cart, his tears falling freely as other customers watched the powerful millionaire reduced to cleaning up fruit like a broken man searching for redemption in the smallest acts of service. 2 days later, fate struck again at First National Bank during Lynn's lunch break. She had come to close the joint account she shared with Patrick, a painful but necessary step toward erasing him from her life. As she waited in line, rehearsing the words she would use to request account closure, a familiar voice behind her made her spine stiffen. "I'd like to make a donation to the Sunshine Orphanage," Patrick said to the teller, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept in weeks. $5 million from my business account." Lynn turned slowly, unable to believe fate could be so cruel twice in 1 week. Patrick stood 3 feet behind her in line, wearing a simple white shirt and jeans instead of his usual expensive suits. He looked like he had lost weight, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled, but what struck Lynn most was the resignation in his posture, like a man who had given up on everything except making amends. Their eyes met across the space that might as well have been an ocean, and Lynn saw her own pain reflected in Patrick's gaze. For a moment, neither spoke, both trapped in the electric tension that still existed between them despite everything that had happened. $5 million, the teller asked Patrick, her voice rising with surprise. "Sir, are you certain about that amount?" "Make it 10 million. Patrick said without breaking eye contact with Lynn. "The Sunshine Orphanage helped me understand what real family means when someone chooses to love you despite having no obligation to do so." Lynn's chest tightened as she realized the implication. Patrick was donating his fortune to orphanages because of her, because she had grown up believing she was from one, before Mandy's cruel revelation destroyed that belief too. "Patrick," Lynn said softly, his name slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness," Patrick said quickly, stepping closer as other bank customers began recognizing them. "I'm trying to become the kind of man who deserves to breathe the same air as you." "By giving away your money?" Lynn asked, confusion mixing with the anger she was trying desperately to maintain. "By giving away everything that made me think I was worth something," Patrick replied, his voice raw with honesty. "Money, cars, reputation, none of it matters without you. I'm learning that the only thing of value I ever had was your love, and I threw it away for one moment of weakness." The bank teller cleared her throat nervously, aware that every customer in the building was watching the dramatic encounter. "Sir, I'll need some paperwork for this donation amount." "Process it," Patrick said, never taking his eyes off Lynn. "And add another $5 million for the Children's Heart Foundation. Make sure the donation is listed as in honor of Lynn Biendelow's pure heart." Lynn felt tears threatening to spill as she watched Patrick systematically destroying his financial empire, piece by piece, all in her name. Part of her wanted to stop him, to tell him that grand gestures wouldn't heal the betrayal, but another part of her was moved by the depth of his regret. "You can't fix this with money," Lynn whispered, aware that everyone in the bank was listening to their conversation with rapt attention. "I know," Patrick replied, his voice breaking slightly, "but I can prove that loving you taught me what really matters. Without you, nothing else has any meaning. Before Lynn could respond, her phone rang loudly, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. She glanced at the screen and saw her Aunt Rebecca's name, providing the perfect excuse to escape the emotionally charged encounter. "I have to go," Lynn said, backing toward the exit while keeping her eyes on Patrick. "Please stop following me. Please stop trying to fix something that can't be repaired." "I'll never stop loving you," Patrick called after her as she pushed through the bank's glass doors. "Even if you never forgive me, I'll never stop trying to become worthy of the love you gave me." Lynn fled to her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. Through the bank's windows, she could see Patrick still standing in line, his shoulders slumped in defeat as he processed donations that would make headlines in the financial news. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and Lynn's heart jumped, thinking it might be Patrick. Instead, it was from an unknown number. "Stop running from destiny. Some meetings are written in the stars. A friend." Lynn stared at the message in confusion and growing unease. Who was watching her encounters with Patrick, and why did it feel like invisible hands were orchestrating these painful meetings? That evening, as she sat in her apartment surrounded by Patrick's unopened letters, Lynn couldn't shake the feeling that their chance encounters weren't random at all. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes, forcing them together for reasons she couldn't understand. She picked up one of Patrick's letters, her fingers tracing his handwriting through the envelope. Inside lay either more pain or the first step toward understanding why fate seemed determined to thrust them together despite their shattered trust. As thunder rumbled outside her window, Lynn made a decision that would change everything. She opened the letter. But what Lynn discovered in Patrick's words would either begin her healing or destroy the last fragments of her ability to trust anyone ever again, and somewhere in the shadows, Mandy was watching every move with a smile that promised even darker revelations were yet to come. Chapter 7. Fiery Encounters and Daily Regret. When love and hate collide in the same heart, they create a fire so intense it can either forge something unbreakable or burn everything to ashes. And Lynn was about to discover which flame burned hotter in her soul. The letter in Lynn's trembling hands contained words that cut deeper than any knife Patrick could have wielded. Written in his distinctive handwriting, each sentence dripped with raw pain and desperate regret that made her chest ache despite her fury. My beautiful Lynn. I sit in our favorite spot in the garden every night, staring at the bench where you used to read poetry while I fell in love with your voice all over again. The roses you planted are blooming, but they look sad without your smile to give them meaning. I burned all my expensive clothes today because they remind me of the arrogant man who thought he deserved you. I keep only the watch you gave me for my birthday because it's the last piece of your love I'm allowed to hold. I replay that night with your mother 1,000 times, trying to understand how I became so weak. I was drunk, scared of not being worthy of you, and when she cried about feeling forgotten, I thought I was being kind. Instead, I was being the biggest fool who ever lived. I don't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face when you discovered the truth. I see the trust dying in your eyes, and I know I killed the most beautiful thing in this world. I love you beyond words, beyond reason, beyond my own pathetic life. Even if you never forgive me, I'll spend every breath trying to become worthy of the love you gave me. Forever yours, Patrick. Lynn crumpled the letter in her fists, fresh tears streaming down her face as Patrick's pain reached through the paper and grabbed her heart. She hated that his suffering affected her, hated that part of her still loved the man who had destroyed everything she believed in. I won't feel sorry for him, she whispered to her empty apartment. I won't let his regret manipulate me like his weakness manipulated him. But even as she spoke the words, Lynn found herself reading the letter again, searching for lies in Patrick's desperation and finding only authentic agony that matched her own. The next morning brought another cruel twist of fate. Lynn's car broke down on Riverside Drive, steam pouring from under the hood as morning commuters honked impatiently around her disabled vehicle. She called her usual mechanic, only to discover he was booked for 2 weeks. "Try Rodriguez Auto Repair on 5th Street, suggested the mechanic. "They're honest, affordable, and take walk-ins." Lynn had no choice but to have her car towed to the unfamiliar shop, unaware that fate was once again orchestrating their collision course. She arrived at Rodriguez Auto Repair to find a modest building with grease-stained floors and the smell of motor oil thick in the air, a world away from the luxury she had grown accustomed to during her relationship with Patrick. "Can I help you, miss?" asked an elderly Hispanic man with kind eyes and oil-stained overalls. "My car overheated," Lynn explained, gesturing toward her towed vehicle. "I need someone to look at the engine." "No problem. Hey, Patrick," the man called toward the back of the garage. "We got a customer with an overheated engine." Lynn's blood turned to ice as a familiar figure emerged from beneath a raised pickup truck, his face and clothes covered in grease, his expensive watches replaced by simple work gloves. Patrick Mahomes, the millionaire who had owned the city's most prestigious car dealership, was working as a common mechanic in a neighborhood auto shop. Their eyes met across the garage, and the wrench Patrick was holding clattered to the concrete floor with a metallic crash that echoed through the sudden silence. "You work here?" Lynn asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Patrick wiped his greasy hands on a rag, his movements nervous and uncertain. "I started last week. I needed to learn how to work with my hands, to understand what honest labor feels like." "The mighty Patrick Mahomes, reduced to changing oil and fixing brakes," Lynn said, her voice dripping with bitter sarcasm. "How the powerful have fallen." "I deserve that," Patrick replied quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. "I deserve every cruel word you want to throw at me." Rodriguez, sensing the tension but not understanding its source, cleared his throat awkwardly. "You two know each other?" "We used to," Lynn said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "before he became an expert at destroying everything he touched." Patrick flinched as if she had slapped him, but he didn't defend himself. Instead, he gestured toward her car with professional courtesy that felt surreal given their history. "Let me look at your engine," he offered. "I won't charge you anything. It's the least I can do after—" He stopped himself, unwilling to speak their private pain in front of strangers. "I don't want your charity," Lynn snapped, but Rodriguez had already started examining her car. "Looks like your radiator's shot," the older man announced. "It's going to take a few hours to fix, and we'll need to order parts. You can wait in the office if you want, or come back tomorrow." Lynn felt trapped. She needed her car for work, but spending hours in the same building as Patrick felt like emotional torture. "How much will it cost?" "About $800, Rodriguez replied apologetically. "I know it's steep, but—" "I'll cover it," Patrick interrupted, pulling cash from his wallet. "No," Lynn said firmly, her pride flaring. "I pay my own bills." "Lynn, please," Patrick said softly. "Let me do this one small thing. You shouldn't have to suffer financially because of my mistakes." Their argument was interrupted when Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman with a walker, hobbled into the garage looking distressed. "Excuse me," she said to Rodriguez. "My grandson called about my car, but I can't afford the $3,000 repair. Is there any way you could work with me on the price? It's all the money I have left this month." Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I wish I could, but the parts alone cost—" "I'll pay for Mrs. Henderson's repair," Patrick said immediately, stepping forward with his wallet. "Whatever it costs, put it on my tab." "Young man, I can't let you do that," Mrs. Henderson protested, but Patrick was already handing Rodriguez a stack of bills. "My grandmother always said that helping strangers is how we prove we're worthy of God's love," Patrick explained gently. Please let me honor her memory by helping you." Lynn watched this exchange with growing confusion. The Patrick she remembered had been generous, but practical, not someone who threw money at strangers' problems. This man, covered in grease, working for wages instead of profits, giving away cash without expecting anything in return, seemed like a completely different person. "Why are you really here?" Lynn asked Patrick once Mrs. Henderson had left with grateful tears. "Why are you working in a garage when you own a car empire?" Patrick set down his tools and looked at her with eyes that held depths of pain she had never seen before. "Because the man who owned that empire was arrogant, entitled, and weak enough to betray the only woman who ever mattered. I'm trying to become someone different, someone who might be worthy of breathing the same air as you." "You think working with your hands will magically erase what you did?" Lynn demanded, her voice rising with renewed anger. "You think playing humble will make me forget that you slept with my mother?" "No," Patrick said simply, his honesty cutting through her fury. "I think learning humility might help me understand why I was foolish enough to risk losing you. I think honest work might teach me the value of things that can't be bought or sold." Lynn stared at him for a long moment, studying the grease under his fingernails and the exhaustion in his eyes. This wasn't the confident millionaire who had swept her off her feet with grand gestures and expensive gifts. This was a broken man trying to rebuild himself from nothing. "You don't get to reinvent yourself to ease your guilt," Lynn said, but her voice lacked the venom she intended. "You don't get to become a better person just because you hurt me." "You're right," Patrick agreed, his acceptance of her anger somehow making it harder for Lynn to maintain her fury. "I don't get to do anything. I lost that right when I betrayed your trust. But I can't stop trying to become worthy of the love you gave me, even if you never give it again." Rodriguez returned from the parts room, breaking the tension with news about Lynn's car. "Good news. I had the radiator in stock. Patrick can have it fixed in 2 hours if you want to wait." Lynn found herself nodding before her rational mind could object. Something about watching Patrick work with his hands, seeing him humbled and changed, made her curious about this transformation that seemed too genuine to be an act. For the next 2 hours, Lynn sat in the small office, watching through the window as Patrick worked on her engine with focused intensity. His movements were careful and precise, but his hands shook slightly whenever he glanced toward the office and caught her watching him. During his lunch break, Patrick sat on a crate outside the garage, eating a simple sandwich instead of the gourmet meals he used to enjoy. Lynn found herself walking outside, drawn by impulses she didn't understand. "You're really doing this," she said, gesturing at his work clothes and humble surroundings. "You're really giving up everything." Patrick looked up at her, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since the wedding. "Everything I had meant nothing without you to share it with. I'd rather be poor and worthy of your love than rich, and knowing I destroyed it." "Love?" Lynn's voice cracked with emotion. "You don't destroy someone you love, Patrick. You protect them. You cherish them. You don't betray them with their own mother." Patrick set down his sandwich and stood up, his eyes filling with tears that he didn't try to hide. "You're right. I failed at the most basic requirement of love, protecting your heart from harm. I was weak when I should have been strong, selfish when I should have been selfless." "Then why?" Lynn demanded, her voice breaking as 18 months of love battled against weeks of betrayal in her heart. "Why did you throw us away? Why did you let her manipulate you?" Patrick's shoulders sagged under the weight of her question. "Because I was terrified of not deserving you. Because I knew a woman like you, kind, pure, beautiful inside and out, was too good for a man like me. When your mother said you were too young and naive to understand real passion, it fed every insecurity I had about our relationship. So you proved her right by being exactly as weak as she said you were," Lynn said, her words cutting deep. "Yes," Patrick admitted, the simple acknowledgement hitting harder than any angry accusation. I proved that I was everything she said, weak, unworthy, and too broken to protect the most precious thing in my life. Lynn stared at him for a long moment, watching tears stream down his grease-stained face as he accepted full responsibility without making excuses. The sight of Patrick, once so proud and powerful, reduced to genuine humility, stirred something in her chest that she desperately wanted to ignore. "Your car's ready," Rodriguez called from the garage, breaking the spell between them. Lynn walked back toward her repaired vehicle, leaving Patrick standing alone in the parking lot. But as she reached her car door, she turned back one final time. "Patrick," she called, her voice softer than it had been since the wedding. "Yes," he answered immediately, hope flooding his features. "Thank you for fixing my car," she said quietly, "and for Mrs. Henderson. That was kind." Before Patrick could respond, Lynn drove away, leaving him standing in the afternoon sunlight with the first spark of hope he had felt in weeks warming his broken heart. But neither of them noticed Mandy's car parked across the street, or the satisfied smile on her face as she watched their encounter through binoculars. Her plan was working perfectly, keeping them apart while torturing them with glimpses of what they had lost. The game was far from over, and Mandy had more moves to make before her ultimate victory. But she had underestimated the power of genuine regret and the magnetic force that still pulled two broken hearts toward each other against all odds. Chapter 8. The Internal War and Patrick's Suffering. The heart is a battlefield where love and betrayal wage war with weapons made of memory, and Lynn Biendolo was about to discover that some wars destroy the soldier fighting them from the inside out. Lynn's apartment had become a shrine to indecision. Patrick's unopened letters covered her coffee table like fallen leaves, each envelope representing another sleepless night of his regret. She had read 3 of them, and each one had chipped away at the armor of anger she was desperately trying to maintain around her shattered heart. She sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, still wearing the simple black dress she had worn to work, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror that had once shown her in wedding gowns and evening wear during happier times. The woman looking back at her was thinner, paler, and carried shadows under her eyes that spoke of weeks spent battling her own emotions. "He's changing his entire life," Lynn whispered to her reflection, thinking about Patrick working in the garage with grease under his fingernails and humility in his eyes. But does that erase what he did? Does transformation equal forgiveness? Her phone buzzed with yet another call from her Aunt Rebecca, the 5th one today. Lynn let it go to voicemail, unable to face another conversation about moving on and finding someone better. Everyone had opinions about her situation, but none of them understood the war raging inside her chest. The truth was terrifying. Despite everything that had happened, Lynn's heart still raced when she saw Patrick. Her body still responded to his presence like a flower turning toward the sun. Even covered in grease and humbled by honest work, he still made her pulse quicken in ways that felt like betrayal to her own pain. Her phone chimed with a voicemail notification, and Lynn reluctantly pressed play. "Sweetheart, it's Aunt Rebecca again. I know you're avoiding my calls, but I'm worried about you. Maria saw you at Rodriguez Auto Shop yesterday, and she said Patrick was working there. Honey, please don't let that man manipulate you with some fake humble act. A man who falls for your mother's seduction will betray you again when the next temptation comes along. You deserve better than someone so weak. Call me back, please." Lynn deleted the message and immediately received a text from her cousin Maria. "Girl, you better not be falling for his sob story. Rich men always think they can buy forgiveness with grand gestures. He's probably laughing with his friends about how gullible you are." But the Patrick she had seen at the garage didn't look like someone who was laughing about anything. He looked like someone who was dying slowly from the inside out, using work and charity to distract himself from unbearable guilt. Lynn's internal struggle was interrupted by a knock at her door. She opened it to find Jasmine holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression of deep concern. "You look terrible," Jasmine said bluntly, pushing past Lynn into the apartment. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't delivered?" "I'm fine," Lynn lied, but her best friend wasn't fooled. "You're not fine. You're fighting a war with yourself, and it's destroying you." Jasmine set the coffee cups on the table beside Patrick's letters and studied Lynn with the keen eye of someone who had known her for years. "Talk to me. What's really going on in your head?" Lynn collapsed onto her couch, pulling a throw pillow against her chest like armor. "I keep thinking about what he said at the garage. About learning to be worthy of the love I gave him. What if he's really changing? What if his regret is genuine? And what if it's not?" Jasmine countered. "What if this is all an elaborate performance to win you back? Rich men are masters at manipulation, Lynn. They don't become millionaires by being honest and humble." "But you didn't see him, Jasmine." "He looked broken. Really, truly broken. Like someone who had lost everything that mattered." "He should look broken," Jasmine said firmly. "He betrayed you with your own mother. He deserves to suffer for what he did." Lynn stood up abruptly, pacing to the window where she could see the city skyline in the distance. Somewhere out there, Patrick was probably lying awake in whatever modest place he was living now, torturing himself with memories of their destroyed love. "I dream about him every night," Lynn admitted quietly. "Not the Patrick who betrayed me, but the Patrick who used to read poetry to me in the garden. The one who remembered that I hate onions and love extra foam in my coffee. The one who cried when I told him I loved him for the first time." "Those were all lies," Jasmine said gently. "If he really loved you the way you thought, he never would have touched your mother." "But what if they weren't lies?" Lynn turned from the window, her eyes bright with tears she had been holding back for weeks. "What if he really did love me, but made one terrible mistake that he'll regret forever? What if I'm throwing away real love because I'm too proud to forgive?" Meanwhile, across the city, Patrick was experiencing his own version of hell. He sat in his tiny studio apartment, a shocking contrast to the mansion he had sold to donate more money to charity, staring at a framed photo of Lynn that he had taken during their weekend in Napa Valley. She was laughing at something he had said, her head thrown back in pure joy, her eyes sparkling with the kind of happiness that made everything else in the world fade away. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the photo, a nightly ritual that had become his only prayer. "I'm so sorry I wasn't strong enough to protect what we had." His apartment was spartanly furnished with only the essentials: a bed, a small table, a single chair, and walls covered with pictures of Lynn during their happiest moments. He had kept nothing else from his former life except the watch she had given him and the memories that tortured him every waking moment. Patrick's phone rang, and he glanced at the screen to see James's name. His former best man had been calling daily, worried about Patrick's complete transformation from successful businessman to broken laborer. "Hey, James," Patrick answered, his voice hoarse from another sleepless night. "Patrick, this has gone too far," James said without preamble. "I just drove by Rodriguez's shop and saw you under the hood of some stranger's car. You're a millionaire businessman, not a mechanic. This self-punishment needs to stop." "I'm not punishing myself," Patrick replied, walking to his single window that overlooked an alley instead of the ocean view he used to enjoy. "I'm trying to learn what it means to earn something instead of buying it." "You're having a breakdown," James insisted. "Lynn's not coming back, Patrick. She humiliated you in front of 300 people. You need to accept that and move on with your life." Patrick's grip tightened on the phone. "Move on? James, do you know what I see every time I close my eyes?" Lynn's face when she discovered the truth. The trust dying in her eyes. The way she looked at me like I was a stranger who had murdered her dreams. It was one mistake. It was the only mistake that mattered. Patrick's voice cracked with emotion. I had everything, her love, her trust, her beautiful heart, and I threw it away for one moment of weakness. How do you move on from destroying paradise? James sighed heavily. By accepting that some things can't be fixed and focusing on rebuilding your life. You're Patrick Mahomes. You're worth hundreds of millions. You can have any woman you want. I don't want any woman, Patrick said quietly. I want Lynn. I want the woman who saw past my money and loved the man underneath all the wealth. I want the girl who used to fall asleep reading in my lap while I played with her hair. I want the love I was stupid enough to destroy. After hanging up, Patrick opened his journal, a habit he had developed to process the tsunami of regret that threatened to drown him daily. Tonight's entry began like all the others. Day 23 without Lynn. I woke up screaming her name again. The nightmares are getting worse. I dream that she forgives me, and then I wake up to remember that I destroyed everything beautiful in my life. Today, Mrs. Henderson brought me cookies to thank me for fixing her car. She said I reminded her of her late husband, who spent his life helping others. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I'm not a good man, just a broken one trying to learn what goodness looks like. I saw Lynn today at the garage. She looked at me like I was a stranger, but for one moment I thought I saw something else in her eyes. Not forgiveness. I don't deserve that yet, but maybe she saw that I'm really trying to change. I would cut off my arm to undo that night with Mandy. I would give up every penny, every car, every breath in my lungs if it meant Lynn could trust me again, but wanting something and deserving it are two different things. I love her more than my own life. That's the only truth I have left. Patrick closed the journal and walked to his bathroom mirror, staring at the man looking back at him. Gone was the confident millionaire with perfect hair and expensive clothes. In his place stood someone with calloused hands, tired eyes, and a face marked by genuine remorse. You did this, he told his reflection. You had an angel, and you chose to be a devil for one night. Now you have to live with the consequences. He touched the watch Lynn had given him, the only expensive item he hadn't sold or donated, and felt fresh tears sting his eyes. The watch still kept perfect time, but Patrick's world had stopped the moment Lynn walked away from their wedding altar. Across the city, Lynn was having her own confrontation with the mirror. She stood in her bathroom, gripping the marble sink as she studied her reflection with brutal honesty. You still love him, she whispered to herself. After everything he did, after all the humiliation, you still love Patrick Mahomes. The admission felt like a knife twisting in her chest. How could she still love someone who had betrayed her so completely? How could her heart be so foolish as to respond to his transformation when her mind knew better? Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from an unknown number again. True love isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up together. Some bridges can be rebuilt stronger than before. A friend. Lynn stared at the cryptic message, her pulse quickening. Someone was definitely watching her, sending these mysterious texts at moments when her resolve was weakest. But who? And why did they seem so invested in her relationship with Patrick? She walked to her window and looked out at the street below, searching for signs of surveillance. A dark sedan was parked across the street, its occupant hidden behind tinted windows, but as Lynn watched, the car pulled away into the night. What game are you playing? Lynn whispered to the empty street. Her question hung in the air unanswered, but somewhere in the darkness, Mandy Biendolo smiled with satisfaction. Her daughter and Patrick were both suffering exactly as planned, dancing to her puppet strings without even realizing who held the controls. The war for their hearts was far from over, and Mandy intended to win completely. But fate was preparing to deal a hand that even Mandy couldn't predict. one that would force Lynn and Patrick together in ways that would test whether love could truly survive the deepest betrayal or whether some wounds were too deep to ever heal. Chapter 9. Hospital Nights and Raw Vulnerability. Death has a way of stripping away all pretenses and revealing the truth that living hearts try desperately to hide. And tonight, Lynn and Patrick would discover that some loves are stronger than pride, deeper than betrayal, and more powerful than the fear of being hurt again. The evening started like any other in Lynn's carefully constructed routine of avoidance. She had taken a job at Meridian Marketing Agency to keep herself busy and distracted from the constant ache in her chest. Working late had become her refuge, the only time when exhaustion could quiet the war between her heart and mind. At 9 o'clock, Lynn finally left the office and drove to Bella Vista, an upscale Italian restaurant where she and Patrick had never dined together. She thought it would be safe territory, free from memories and any chance of running into the man who still haunted her dreams. She was wrong. Lynn had barely been seated at a corner table when she spotted Patrick across the restaurant, dining with what appeared to be a potential client, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who was gesturing enthusiastically while Patrick listened with professional attention. Even from a distance, Lynn could see that Patrick looked different. Gone were his tailored suits and arrogant posture. He wore a simple navy blazer and white shirt, and his entire demeanor radiated the humility she had witnessed at the auto shop. Lynn's server approached with a warm smile. "Good evening, miss. Can I start you with something to drink?" "White wine, please," Lynn replied, trying to focus on the menu instead of the man who made her pulse race from 50 feet away. "And I'd like to order the seafood risotto." "Excellent choice," the server said. "Just to let you know, we use pine nuts in our risotto preparation. Do you have any allergies I should be aware of?" Lynn's attention was divided between the menu and stealing glances at Patrick, so she barely processed the question. No allergies. That sounds perfect. What Lynn had forgotten in her distracted state was that she had developed a severe tree nut allergy during college, a fact that Patrick knew by heart because he had memorized every detail about her health and safety during their relationship. In restaurants, he had always been the one to ask about ingredients and ensure her meals were safe. The risotto arrived beautifully plated, steam rising from the creamy rice that smelled divine. Lynn took her first bite, savoring the rich flavors as she tried to lose herself in the act of eating something delicious. The second bite tasted even better, and she began to relax for the first time in weeks. Then her throat began to tighten. At first, Lynn thought she was just emotional. Her chest had been tight with anxiety for weeks, but within minutes, her breathing became labored, and red welts began appearing on her neck and arms. The pine nuts in the risotto were triggering a severe allergic reaction that was escalating rapidly. Panic set in as Lynn realized what was happening. She tried to signal the server, but her throat was closing too quickly for her to speak clearly. Her vision began to blur as her airway constricted, and she knocked over her wineglass in her struggle to breathe. Across the restaurant, Patrick's business conversation stopped mid-sentence as some instinct made him turn toward Lynn's table. What he saw made his blood turn to ice. Lynn was clutching her throat, her face flushed red, and she was clearly in severe distress. "Call 911!" Patrick shouted as he leapt from his table, abandoning his client and racing across the restaurant with his heart pounding in absolute terror. "She's having an allergic reaction." He reached Lynn's table just as she began to lose consciousness, her body going limp in the chair as her breathing became dangerously shallow. Without hesitation, Patrick scooped her into his arms, her head falling against his chest as he felt for her pulse with trembling fingers. "Lynn, stay with me," he whispered desperately, carrying her toward the exit as restaurant staff cleared the way. "Don't you dare leave me. I can't lose you like this." The valet had Patrick's car ready in seconds, and he laid Lynn carefully in the passenger seat, her beautiful face now swollen and her breathing barely audible. Patrick's hands shook violently as he started the engine, but his voice remained steady as he spoke to her unconscious form. "I'm getting you to the hospital, my love. You're going to be okay. I won't let anything happen to you." Patrick broke every speed limit, racing to Metropolitan General Hospital, running red lights and weaving through traffic while keeping one hand on Lynn's wrist to monitor her fading pulse. He had never been more terrified in his entire life, not when he was building his business empire, not when he was facing financial ruin, not even when Lynn had left him at the altar. "Don't take her from me," he prayed to whatever force controlled the universe. "I know I don't deserve her, but please don't let her die because of my sins." He screeched into the hospital emergency bay and carried Lynn through the automatic doors, shouting for help as medical staff rushed toward them with a gurney. As they transferred Lynn from his arms to the hospital bed, Patrick felt like he was losing pieces of his soul. "What's her name?" asked Dr. Rachel Torres, the emergency physician who took charge of Lynn's care. "Lynn Biendolo," Patrick answered immediately. "She's allergic to tree nuts. She had seafood risotto with pine nuts about 20 minutes ago. Her pulse is weak and her breathing is severely compromised." Dr. Torres looked at Patrick with professional curiosity as nurses began administering emergency treatment. "Are you her husband?" The question hit Patrick like a physical blow. "I was supposed to be," he whispered, watching helplessly as medical professionals worked to save the woman he loved. "I was supposed to protect her from everything, including this." "Sir, we need you to step back while we work," a nurse said gently, but Patrick couldn't move. The thought of leaving Lynn's side, even for medical treatment, felt impossible. "Please," Patrick begged Dr. Torres, "let me stay with her. She's alone in this world because of mistakes I made. Don't make her wake up alone too." Something in Patrick's voice, the raw desperation of a man watching his universe collapse, made Dr. Torres nod. "You can stay, but keep out of the way." For the next 3 hours, Patrick sat in a plastic chair beside Lynn's hospital bed, holding her hand while machines monitored her vital signs. He had never felt more helpless in his life. All his wealth, all his business success, all his connections meant nothing when the woman he loved was fighting for her life. "I should have been there," Patrick whispered to Lynn's unconscious form, his thumb tracing circles on her palm the way he used to when she had nightmares. "I should have been protecting you, asking about ingredients, keeping you safe like I promised I always would." As the night wore on, Patrick's vigil became a marathon of whispered confessions and desperate promises. He told Lynn's sleeping form about every moment of regret he had experienced since the wedding, about the letters he wrote but never sent, about the sleepless nights when he walked the streets of their city just hoping to catch a glimpse of her. "I burned everything that reminded me of the man I used to be," he confessed to her still form. "I gave away the cars, the money, the mansion, everything except the watch you gave me, because it's the only piece of your love I have left. I've been working 18-hour days at the garage, learning humility from people who have nothing but still show kindness." Lynn's breathing gradually improved as the medications worked, but she remained unconscious, her face peaceful despite the trauma her body had endured. Patrick studied every detail of her features, the curve of her cheekbones, the length of her eyelashes, the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident she had told him about during one of their late-night conversations. "I memorized everything about you," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "The way you scrunch your nose when you're thinking hard. How you always order extra foam in your coffee. The fact that you sing off-key in the shower, but it's the most beautiful sound in the world. I kept all those memories because they're the only proof I have that I was once worthy of something perfect." Dawn was breaking through the hospital windows when Lynn's eyelids finally fluttered open, Her vision was blurry, her throat felt raw, and her entire body ached. But the first thing she saw was Patrick's face, inches from hers, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and tears. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Patrick's face crumpled with relief so intense it was almost painful to witness. "I couldn't leave you. I know I don't have the right to be here, but I couldn't leave you alone." Lynn tried to sit up, wincing as her body protested. "How long was I unconscious?" 6 hours, Patrick replied, helping her adjust her pillows with the gentleness he had always shown her. "You almost died, Lynn. Your throat closed completely. If we hadn't gotten you here when we did..." The reality of how close she had come to death hit Lynn like a wave. She could have died alone in that restaurant, and Patrick, despite everything between them, had been the one to save her life. "Why were you there?" she asked, studying his face for signs of manipulation or calculated planning. "Business dinner with a potential client," Patrick answered honestly. "But the moment I saw you in distress, nothing else mattered. Not business, not my pride, not even the fact that you hate me. I just knew I had to save you." Lynn stared at him for a long moment, seeing exhaustion, genuine fear, and something else she was afraid to identify. "You look terrible." Patrick's laugh was hollow, but held a note of relief that she was awake and talking. "I haven't slept since the wedding. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face when you discovered the truth, and I can't bear it." "Patrick," Lynn began, but he gently placed a finger over her lips. "Don't say anything yet," he whispered. "Just rest. Just let me be grateful that you're alive and breathing and still in this world, even if you never want to see me again." Dr. Torres entered the room with Lynn's test results, breaking the intimate moment between them. "Good news. The reaction is under control and your vitals are stable. But I want to keep you for observation for another 12 hours. "I'll stay with her," Patrick said immediately. "No," Lynn said firmly, though her voice lacked conviction. "You don't need to." "I need to," Patrick interrupted, his voice carrying desperation he couldn't hide. "Please, Lynn, let me do this one thing right. Let me be here to protect you like I should have been doing all along." Lynn looked into his eyes and saw something that made her chest tighten, not manipulation or calculation, but pure, raw love, mixed with regret so deep it had changed him fundamentally. The Patrick sitting beside her hospital bed wasn't the arrogant millionaire who had betrayed her. This was someone broken and rebuilt, humbled and desperate to prove his transformation was real. "Okay," she whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. "You can stay." Patrick's relief was so profound that fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. "Thank you. Thank you for letting me be here when you needed help." As Lynn drifted back to sleep, Patrick maintained his vigil, whispering promises to her sleeping form about the man he was becoming and the love he would spend his lifetime proving he deserved. But neither of them knew that Mandy had been watching from the hospital parking garage, her face twisted with fury as she realized her plan to keep them apart was beginning to crumble. The night that almost took Lynn's life had given Patrick a chance to prove his devotion was real, but Mandy wasn't finished playing her games, and the most dangerous moves in her strategy were yet to come. Chapter 10: The Ultimate Test and Powerful Reunion. True love isn't born in moments of perfection. It's forged in the fires of forgiveness, tested in the depths of despair, and proven when two broken hearts choose each other over pride, pain, and the safety of staying apart forever. The hospital room had become their sanctuary from the world outside. For 3 days, Patrick had maintained his vigil beside Lynn's bed as she recovered from the allergic reaction that had nearly claimed her life. During the quiet hours between nurse visits and doctor checkups, something profound had shifted between them. Not forgiveness yet, but a fragile truce that allowed them to exist in the same space without the explosive battles that had marked their previous encounters. Lynn watched Patrick through her eyelashes as he slept fitfully in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, his body twisted at an awkward angle, but his hand still reaching toward her bed as if protecting her even in sleep. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect appearance was replaced by wrinkled clothes and day-old stubble that spoke of a man who cared more about her recovery than his own comfort. "You haven't left," Lynn said softly when Patrick stirred awake, his eyes immediately focusing on her with the intensity of someone checking that she was still breathing. "I told you I wouldn't," Patrick replied, straightening in the chair and wincing as his neck protested the awkward sleeping position. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Lynn admitted, though her throat still felt raw. "But you look terrible. When's the last time you went home to shower or eat a real meal?" Patrick's smile was sad but genuine. "Home doesn't exist without you in it. And food doesn't taste like anything when I'm terrified of losing the only person who ever mattered." Before Lynn could respond, the hospital room door burst open with enough force to rattle the walls. Mandy Biandolo stood in the doorway, her face flushed with fury and her designer purse clutched like a weapon in her perfectly manicured hands. "What is he doing here?" Mandy demanded, pointing an accusing finger at Patrick. "How dare you manipulate my daughter when she's vulnerable and sick?" Patrick stood up immediately, positioning himself between Mandy and Lynn's hospital bed with protective instincts that surprised even him. "I'm not manipulating anyone. Lynn almost died, and I'm making sure she's safe." "Safe?" Mandy's laugh was sharp and cruel. "She's in danger because of you. Everything bad that's happened to her stems from your weakness and selfishness." Lynn struggled to sit up in her hospital bed, her voice weak but determined. "Mother, please leave. I don't want you here." "Don't want me?" Mandy's voice rose to a shriek that made the heart monitor beep faster. "I'm your mother! I raised you when no one else wanted you. I sacrificed everything for an ungrateful child who doesn't appreciate anything I've done." "You sacrificed nothing," Lynn said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You manipulated, schemed, and destroyed everything good in my life because you were jealous of my happiness." Mandy's face twisted with rage as she advanced toward the hospital bed. "Your happiness? You call being engaged to a weak man who falls for the first temptation happiness. I saved you from marrying someone who would have betrayed you eventually." "You created the betrayal," Patrick shouted, his composure finally cracking completely. "You planned everything. You seduced me when I was drunk and vulnerable, then orchestrated the perfect moment to destroy Lynn's wedding day." "I gave her a lesson about trusting people too easily," Mandy shot back viciously, "and clearly she hasn't learned it yet since she's letting you hover around her hospital bed like some devoted lover." Lynn's heart monitor began beeping rapidly as her stress levels spiked. The confrontation was becoming too much for her weakened system, and Patrick noticed immediately. "Get out," Patrick said to Mandy, his voice deadly quiet. "You're making her worse. Haven't you hurt her enough?" "I'll leave when I'm ready," Mandy snarled, but her words were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Torres, who took one look at the elevated heart monitor and Lynn's distressed condition. "Everyone out except immediate family," Dr. Torres ordered firmly. "The patient needs rest, not stress." "I'm her mother," Mandy declared triumphantly. "And he's—" Dr. Torres looked at Patrick questioningly. "He's the man who saved my life," Lynn said quietly, her voice carrying across the room with startling clarity. "Patrick stays. Mother, you leave." Mandy's face went white with shock and fury. For her daughter to choose Patrick over her own mother in front of strangers was the ultimate betrayal in her mind. "Fine," Mandy hissed, gathering her purse with sharp, angry movements, "but don't come crying to me when he breaks your heart again." Some people never learn from their mistakes. After Mandy stormed out, Slamming the door behind her, the hospital room fell into blessed silence. Lynn's heart monitor gradually returned to normal as the stress of confrontation faded, leaving only her and Patrick in the soft light of evening filtering through the windows. "Thank you," Patrick said quietly, "for letting me stay." "Thank you for being here when I needed someone," Lynn replied, the words feeling strange but right on her lips. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both processing the emotional storm that had just passed. Outside, a thunderstorm was building, and lightning began illuminating the hospital room in brief, dramatic flashes. "Patrick," Lynn said finally, her voice thoughtful, "why did you really give up everything? The money, the cars, the mansion, was it guilt or something else?" Patrick considered her question carefully, knowing that his answer might be the most important words he ever spoke. "It started as guilt," he admitted, "but it became something deeper. I realized that the man who had all those things was someone I didn't like very much. He was arrogant, entitled, and weak enough to hurt the most precious person in his life." "And now?" Lynn asked, studying his face in the dim light. "Now I'm trying to become someone worthy of the love you gave me," Patrick said, his voice breaking slightly. "Not to win you back. I know I don't deserve that chance. But because you taught me what it feels like to be truly loved, and I want to honor that gift by becoming better." Thunder crashed outside the window, and the lights flickered as the storm intensified. In the brief darkness, Lynn made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I read your letters," she confessed quietly. "All of them." Patrick's breath caught in his throat. "What did you think?" "I thought they were the words of a man who understands what he lost," Lynn replied, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I thought they were written by someone whose regret runs deeper than any ocean." "It does," Patrick whispered, leaning forward in his chair. "Lynn, losing you is worse than dying. I wake up every morning hating myself more than you ever could. I see your face in every sunset, hear your laugh in every song, and feel the emptiness where my soul used to be." "Then why?" Lynn's voice cracked with the pain she had been carrying for weeks. "Why did you let her seduce you? Why weren't you strong enough to resist?" Patrick's tears fell freely as he finally answered the question that had tormented them both. "Because I was terrified that you were too good for me. Because when Mandy said you deserved a more experienced man, it confirmed every fear I had about not being worthy of your love. I was drunk, insecure, and stupidly grateful that someone was telling me I was good enough for something, even if it was wrong. So you proved her right by being exactly as weak as she said you were," Lynn said, but her voice held understanding instead of accusation. "Yes," Patrick admitted, his honesty cutting through the storm between them. "I proved that I was everything she said, weak, unworthy, and too broken to protect the most precious thing in my life. But Lynn, that weakness taught me what strength really means. It means choosing love over fear, trust over suspicion, and you over everything else in this world." The storm outside reached its peak, and the hospital's power flickered before going out completely. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the room as Lynn and Patrick sat in the semi-darkness, finally able to see each other clearly, without the harsh fluorescent lights that had hidden nothing. "I still love you," Lynn whispered, the confession torn from her heart like a physical wound. "I hate that I love you. I hate that seeing you work with your hands and help strangers makes my heart race. I hate that watching you suffer makes me want to comfort you." Patrick's entire body went still as he processed her words. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that love is apparently stronger than betrayal," Lynn said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm saying that watching you transform from the arrogant man who hurt me into someone humble and broken and real has changed something inside me. I'm saying that I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to this pain is killing both of us." Patrick fell to his knees beside her hospital bed, his hands trembling as he reached for hers. "Lynn, do you mean it? Can you really forgive someone who destroyed paradise?" "I mean that our love was strong enough to survive your mother's manipulation and my mother's cruelty," Lynn said, squeezing his hands with strength that belied her recent trauma. "I mean that the man kneeling beside this bed isn't the same man who betrayed me. You've suffered, you've changed, you've learned what real love requires. I'll spend every day proving I'm worthy of this second chance," Patrick promised, bringing her hands to his lips and kissing them with reverence. "Our love will be stronger because we've walked through fire together and chosen each other on the other side." "No grand gestures," Lynn said firmly, though her eyes sparkled with tears of joy. "No expensive gifts or lavish surprises, just honesty, humility, and the promise that you'll never let anyone, including my mother, come between us again." "I promise," Patrick whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Just us, building something real from the ashes of what we lost." As the storm passed and moonlight began filtering through the hospital windows, Lynn and Patrick held each other for the first time since their world had exploded. Their embrace was careful, tender, and filled with the knowledge that their love had survived the ultimate test. Their love story, born from betrayal and nearly destroyed by manipulation, had emerged stronger on the other side of their darkest night. They had learned that true love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other despite the scars, forgiving the unforgivable, and building something beautiful from the wreckage of broken trust. In the parking garage below, Mandy sat in her car with tears of rage streaming down her face as she watched the hospital room where her daughter and Patrick were rebuilding what she had tried so hard to destroy. Her plan had failed completely, but as she drove away into the night, Mandy couldn't know that her cruelty had actually created something more powerful than what existed before. A love tested by fire, proven by suffering, and strengthened by the choice to forgive when forgiveness seemed impossible. Patrick and Lynn's second beginning would be built on truth instead of illusion, humility instead of arrogance, and a love deep enough to survive anything the world could throw at them. Their fairy tale had been shattered and rebuilt, not with wealth and grand gestures, but with genuine transformation, hard-earned forgiveness, and the kind of love that only grows stronger when tested by the deepest betrayal and the most difficult choices of the heart.